and the people around me who've helped create that safe space. Because then it allows all of us to reflect, regulate, and grow through that tension. Traditionally, in martial arts, feedback tends to flow downwards. Generally, a lower belt wouldn't give feedback to a higher belt because it could be perceived as disrespectful. But one thing I'll never forget is how my head coach created space for us to share our voices. She knew it was already difficult enough for women to actually show up to the mats and trained. So when we gave feedback, she didn't get defensive. She didn't shut down. She paused, listened, and took it seriously. On top of that, she modeled that consistently and encouraged us to use our voice while training. This created space for us to do the same. Now, if someone is consistently catching me in the same position or tapping me from there, no matter where they are in comparison to my journey, I don't get offended. That didn't happen by accident. That environment was actually designed. And of course, discernment still matters, because if someone gives me advice and they are ego tripping or the advice doesn't make sense, I just take it with a grain of salt. But the bigger lesson still stands. When people feel safe and empowered, they're more willing to speak up and model similar behaviors that I shared earlier. So last month, I shared what I learned about perceived versus actual threats and the link to why difficult conversations can feel so uncomfortable. This month, I want to build on that and share what I've noticed that has helped me, my guests, and my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu teammates navigate those moments more effectively. Not perfectly, but more effectively. And a lot of it comes back to three things I've been seeing on and off the mats. One is psychological safety. Two is understanding what's actually in my control. And three is self-regulation and feedback loops. Starting with number one, psychological safety. Most difficult conversations don't go poorly because of the content alone. They often go poorly because of perceived threats, sometimes actual threats. And what has helped me is understanding that psychological safety is not about removing discomfort. It's about creating enough safety for people to take interpersonal risks like disagreeing, sharing concerns, admitting mistakes, or giving honest feedback without fearing ridicule or rejection. That distinction matters because people can still feel tension, discomfort, or strong emotion in a difficult conversation and still feel safe enough to stay engaged. What I've noticed is that when people feel safer, they regulate better, they listen more openly, they're less defensive, they give timely feedback, and they're more willing to problem solve instead of self-protect. However, when psychological safety is low, I've seen the opposite happen. People avoid the conversation, they delay feedback, they stay silent, they overthink every word. Sometimes there's more side chatter than conversations that are productive to move things forward. And most times, they're focused on protecting themselves than solving the actual issues. So what has helped me in shifting from, how do I say this perfectly, to how do I make this safe enough to navigate honestly? For me, that looks like this: genuinely caring about the other person's success, staying curious and asking, how did we get here, instead of jumping to blame, being respectful while still holding standards. So psychological safety isn't about avoiding tension. It's about making it safe enough to grow through tension honestly. That's what my coach and some of the greatest leaders that I've encountered model. And because they modeled that, me and others became more open to sharing and receiving feedback. That brings me to my second point. What is within my control? This distinction actually helps me walk into difficult conversations with more confidence because I can't manage their reaction, the outcome, the tone, the timing, whether they get defensive. Trying to control that, it actually spikes my anxiety. So what I'm learning is that I feel actually much more grounded when I focus on what's mine to carry. What does that look like? My preparation, my tone, my clarity, my intention, whether I've checked my own triggers, whether I've actually modeled openness to feedback, and asking permission, engaging if the timing is right for them to actually have that conversation. And it might sound like this: what is a good time to talk about some feedback that I have? Or on the mats, instead of stopping mid-roll and giving unsolicited feedback, unless of course they asked for that or something doesn't feel safe, or perhaps it's even one of those things where you just see them stuck forever, I'll often wait till the end and ask, are you open to some feedback? And when I gauge someone's readiness and openness, they're actually more likely to engage in the conversation. Again, what's not in my control is their reaction, their defensiveness, their readiness, and the kind of day that they're having before walking into that moment. That reminder alone is empowering for me because that allows me to regulate myself and feel steadier as I navigate those conversations. This brings me to my third point, self-regulation and feedback loops. This is super helpful because it allows me to get to know what pushes my buttons and how I want to respond accordingly. Having trusted people who give me open and honest feedback because they want me to succeed or we're working towards a common goal together. Waiting until I'm not emotionally charged before I bring something up. Sometimes that requires me to walk away for 24 hours and see if it still matters. Because if we go into it emotionally charged and people sense that you're coming in hot, I've noticed that their walls go up and they go straight into self-preservation mode. And they're not ready to have that conversation. Another thing that's helped is organizing my thoughts and feelings so I can clearly articulate what I've noticed. So the facts, get curious, create space for the other person to share, and then identify a path forward. That is an example of what a feedback loop could look like instead of having a one-sided conversation where I just go in, dump, and then I move on. Now, what takes me a day to work through once took me a week. That's because of intentional practice and the people around me who've helped create that safe space. Because then it allows all of us to reflect, regulate, and grow through that tension. So what I'm noticing is that effective leadership isn't about never getting triggered. It's about building and modeling awareness, responding more intentionally, creating safety for honesty, and learning how to adapt your communication, which is a whole separate episode in itself, by the way. So as I wrap up this episode, I think back to how my head coach welcomed feedback from lower belts and have empowered all of us to use our voice. That wasn't just humility. It is leadership. It's psychological safety in action. And I think that's why it resonated with me so deeply because of how it translates into the corporate setting as well. So last month's solo episode was about recognizing why difficult conversations can feel so uncomfortable. This month's episode is about what has actually helped me navigate them more effectively. As I wrap up this conversation, I want to leave you with this coaching question. What is one shift that you can make the next time you need to have an uncomfortable conversation so that you and the other person can feel safer to have that conversation?